Hi, hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcos. I work for DuckDuckGo as a senior Android engineer. That's my Twitter handle if you are interested in that kind of thing. And if you were in the roundtable earlier today, that was a bit of a teaser of what's going to happen now. So again, I thank you very much for joining me in what's been quite a year, right? This has been the year, and I mean, still is the year of the coronavirus, the remote work. We also saw the CEOs of Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon testify before the US Congress in a historic antitrust hearing. Also, just a few weeks ago, Google was sued by the Department of Justice over monopoly power and abuses. Uncle Bob still, I mean, Uncle Bob, I guess, is just one of our uncles. Women are still being discriminated at work, and especially Black women. And at this point, it doesn't even matter if you work for what is supposed to be the nicest company in tech, by the way. The Black Lives Matter movement had a massive impact this year as well and kept exposing systemic racism, which, by the way, we are responsible for it in some cases. Like here, apparently you are not entitled to your own name. And we are still hiding behind all racist conventions just because it has always been like that. Coding bootcamps are still overcharging a stupid amount of money to people trying to get into tech and failing at teaching basic concepts. Also, in this dark timeline, Facebook brought some humor to the table by taking the European Union to court over, wait for it, a privacy dispute. Also, Facebook bought Giphy, and with that, more of your personal data. And if you're wondering how, you should know that Giphy actually can track its keystroke, the search. Back in May, the Facebook SDK crashed tons of iOS apps, including Spotify, TikTok, Pinterest, Tinder, Google, SoundCloud, many more. And you want to know the best part of the whole thing is that they had hidden code that will just run by including the SDK. So commenting out all the calls to the SDK did basically nothing. And not even 3 months later, another Facebook SDK issue had again numerous apps crashing. I was also called hack fraud on Twitter, which I thought was funny. Twitter, by the way, still not respecting the user setting to see latest tweets first. And I could go on and on, like this all happened in the last year, but let's pause here for a second, because there's a lot of ground that I want to cover, and I actually don't really have enough time. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to focus in three different areas: ethics, privacy, and our community. So let's begin with ethics. You are probably familiar with Zuckerberg's motto of move fast, break things. However, believe it or not, programming, like what we do, is actually a profession. And what we do on a daily basis has a very big impact in people's lives. In engineering, there is this thing called factor of safety, or FOS. And you can see the formula there, by the way. Factor of safety expresses how much stronger a system is than it needs to be for an intended load. So here, yield stress is how much the design part actually will be able to withstand, and working stress is what the item is required to be able to withstand. So a factor of safety of 1 will support only the design load and no more. Any additional load will cause the structure to fail. A structure with an FOS of 2 will fail at twice the design load, and so on and so forth. So just as an example, a loader like the one that you can see on the screen, it usually has a factor of safety against tipping between 2.5 and 3.5. So if they were supposed to carry 1 ton, it will actually fail at carrying 2.5 ton or 3.5 tons, somewhere between there. A bolt has usually a factor of safety of 8. Any structural steel work in buildings usually has a factor of safety between 5 and 7. And the thing is that actual engineering cannot afford moving fast or breaking things, and neither should we, because when we move fast and break things, this is what happens. Today, in sharing economy struggles, our up-powered car rental lost service on the side of a mountain in rural California, and now I live here, I guess. So in theory, they didn't have enough cell service to start up the car. And I mean, we might think that this is kind of funny, but let's think for a second here and let's think about the experience that your apps gives to users when when they lose the internet signal. Have you even tested what happens in that case? Do you care about what happens? At the end of the day, basically after 2 tow trucks and 20 calls to customer service, the whole thing was a software issue and the car just needed to be rebooted. How crazy is this? So thing is that what we do as software developers has real impact on people's lives. Boeing finds new software flaw on grounded 737 MAX jet. 346 people die. The main culprit here is something called the Manubrium Characteristics Augmentation System, or NCAS. And what the NCAS does is that it pushes the nose of the plane down when it thinks the angle of attack might exceed its limits, so it avoids the plane from stalling. And there were a few issues with the NCAS, but in a nutshell, the implementation denied the pilots the opportunity to override the system. So if the angle of attack sensor failed, the MCAS will actually think the plane was about to stall, it will take cover, and it will pitch the nose down. So you can imagine the pilots just desperately trying to pull the nose back up. And this is software that we're talking about, right? This is not a wing of the plane just falling over. This is actual software. This is lines of code that we write. And do you know what our factor of safety is? It's test. But we don't have time to write tests because we have to move fast, right? We have deadlines, we have product owners, we have clients that are changing requirements every day, and they still want us to deliver by a certain day. And this whole idea behind move fast and break things was to quickly release something, an MVP, let's call it, that wasn't perfect, but could test your initial hypothesis. And you don't need clean and perfect code for that, because at that point, like, time is more important. And if you release something and it doesn't work, then you can pivot to something else. So that's the whole startup logic. The problem is that we have taken that move fast, break things motto and made it the norm. So you code for days without sleep, compete against your peers to see who can ship more features, don't care about quality that much because we have to move fast. And it is not surprising that in Silicon Valley and other places, programmers have now started taking Adderall and microdosing magic mushrooms, so just to keep up with this frantic pace. But luckily, this era is coming to an end. In a report from .everyone, more than a quarter of over 1,000 tech workers surveyed in the UK say that they have seen decisions made about the technology that they felt could have negative consequences for people or society. Participants there also highlighted failures in safety and security and inadequate testing before product releases. And nearly 2/3 would like more time and resources to think about the impacts of their product, which, to be honest, is not surprising looking at how we do things. Like here, for example, Excel. Why using Microsoft tool caused COVID-19 results to be lost? So what happened here was that Public Health England was dropping CSV files containing coronavirus cases into an Excel sheet. But they just happened to pick the old format file of XLS rather than XLSX, which meant that only 65,000 rows of data were available. And because of that, nearly 16,000 coronavirus cases went unreported. And that problem is now thought to have led to more than 1,500 COVID deaths in England. So we cannot move fast. Like, we are affecting real lives here. In that study, nearly 1 in 5 of those that were surveyed said that they went on to leave their companies as a result of all these practices. And I can also count myself in that 18%. So I'll tell you a story. My first serious job before moving to Android development, and we're talking, I don't know, 2009, 2010, was working in a company that was doing SMS promotion. So the typical send car to 333 and you can win a car. And I work on the on the main team that wrote the code that was answering all the SMSs. And I mean, sure, it was fun at the beginning. It was my first job, but the whole goal here was to keep our users sending messages, to keep them engaged. So what will happen is that someone will send car because they want to win a car, and then we will reply with thank you. If you want to increase your chances to win the car, send us your name. And then they will tell you, okay, I'll send you the name because I want to win the car. And then we will reply with, hello, Marcos, tell us where you live, and then we will give you 10 extra points so you can win the car. And then you say, okay, I'm in Leeds. And then we keep sending you, okay, now if you answer these 3 questions, we'll give you 20 points per question. Please reply yes to get the first question, and so on and so forth. And the point here is that this was my first job. I was actually making quite a fair amount of money, like way more than some of my friends were making at that time, but I left because I couldn't keep doing this. And I ended up moving on to a different company with a much lower salary, but at the end of the day, I was just happier. So I don't know, let's say that you work for Facebook, for example. I mean, maybe you might want to consider this option as well. And I'm not the only one advocating for this, as you can see here. So we will help you if you're going to get out of there. And I'll give you more reasons, by the way. Facebook exposed 87 million users to Cambridge Analytica. And I really wanted to pull this out of the whole move fast break things because I think this was very intentional. Because when your only North Star is making money through growth, and that's the business model here in a nutshell, I really doubt that anyone looked back at Cambridge Analytica and thought this was an accident. I think they did their job and they did it very well. And we'll talk in a second about privacy and the surveillance economy as well. And something that we haven't even considered yet is how we are impacting the environment. I mean, surely there's no way that the code that we write can affect the environment. I mean, I think it does, but okay, let's say that you actually don't work on a car. You don't write software for a car. What about blockchain? What about Bitcoin? Bitcoin uses more electricity per transaction than a British household in 2 months. The amount of energy needed to run the cryptocurrency is now the same as the entire electrical consumption of Chile. In fact, like back in 2018, only 38 countries were definitely consuming more electricity than total Bitcoin mining. So if you're mining Bitcoin, you are directly contributing to destroying our environment. That's ethics done. Let's move on to privacy. And privacy is very close to my heart because it's basically what we do at DuckDuckGo. So privacy is freedom, like period. Privacy treats people like people, not like data points, and puts them in control of their personal information. Unfortunately, we live in a surveillance economy where a few companies are amassing unprecedented amounts of data, knowledge, and power. And all of this with the goal of personalizing our experiences. More like to predict our click-through behavior though, so they can earn more money. And again, that's their business model. And contrary to what you might think, privacy is not just for people who have something to hide. Privacy is for everyone. Studies show that when someone knows they are being watched, they act differently, which can be seen as a lot of self-expression. I mean, simply put, surveillance may cause people to change their behavior and then become conformists. And here, I want to tackle 2 specific issues that directly affect you. The first one is the filter bubble. This is the manipulation of your search results based on your personal data. In practice, what this means is that links are moved up or down or added to your search results, filtering out other search results. And all these results that you can see on the screen when you go to Google, they are the result of the personal information that Google has on you. And that's browsing history, that's purchase history, and so many more. And What this does is that it puts you in a bubble based on what Google's algorithm thinks that you are most likely to click on. So, for example, let's say that you do one of those online quizzes to find out if you like the country or the coast. And I'm sure you've done like plenty of this. And it turns out that you like more the countryside. What you didn't know is that the site has an analytics SDK implemented, like Google Analytics. And Google Analytics is not free because Google is nice or altruistic. If they are not charging you money, it's because they are monetizing your data. And what you should know is that over 85% of the websites have Google tracking code on them. So just by visit this site and finish the quiz, now your bubble is getting smaller and smaller, and then you start to see more countryside related results in your searches than before. And this is very dangerous when it comes to political topics. In 2016, the filter bubble helped Trump to win the election. And I'll tell you what, like most of us didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming, like Brexit. But the information that we take in is so personalized that we are blind to other perspectives. It also simultaneously explains why Trumpism has flourished and why so many of us are insulated from it. But this is not new. Like back in 2011, there's this great book called The Filter Bubble, What the Internet is Hiding from You. So that book already proposed the thesis that although we think of the internet as an impartial and universal library, with Google kind of like serving as a superhuman organization system, it is remarkably and perhaps pathologically individualized. Back then, it was also believed that Google used 57 signals to tailor its search results to us. In 2016, that number was over 200, and today we just don't know because Google has removed that information from their search explanation. So the only thing that we know is that it's made by hundreds of different factors. And ultimately, democracy only works if we as citizens are capable of thinking beyond our narrow self-interest. But to do so, we need a shared view of the world that we cohabit. We need to come into contact with other people's lives. We need to come into contact with other people's needs and desires. And the filter bubble pushes us in the opposite direction. It creates the impression that our narrow self-interest is all that exists. And while this is great for getting people to shop online, it's not great for getting people to make better decisions together. The second issue that I want to tackle here is discriminatory targeting. Because now that all your data is spread across different companies, you are more likely to get specific ads tailored to you. And you might think that it makes sense because you want a more personalized experience. However, what you might not know is that all that data can also be used against you. In 2016, Facebook users sue over alleged racial discrimination in housing and job ads. 2016 as well, Facebook lets advertisers exclude users by race. 2 years later, 2018, Facebook was sued by housing advocates just because they let landlords and real estate brokers target advertising to discriminate against women, people with disabilities, and families with children. In 2019, last year, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development charged Facebook with housing discrimination over companies' targeted advertising practices. And after at least 3 years that we know of, Facebook finally overhauled ad targeting to prevent discrimination in housing, credit, and also employment, but not before settling 5 lawsuits and paying only $5 million in legal fees and other costs, which, by the way, is nothing compared to the $15 billion that they got on Q1 of 2019. Also, Google just recently announced back in June new policies to restrict discriminatory targeting for housing ads, literally a year after Facebook was sued over the same thing. So, I don't know, like maybe you don't care about housing, but I have news for you. Companies like Capital One, which you might well know, Enterprise Holding, and many others use Facebook targeting technology to advertise positions only to men and younger workers. So So women and workers over 55 never saw the promoted listings. And you might not be a woman, but you will eventually be older than 55, I can tell you that. And what we see every day is the internet being overrun by privacy abusers, creating a learned helplessness. People want privacy, but they feel powerless to do anything about it. According to a Pew Research study, 81% of Americans say that they have little to no control over the data that companies collect about them. Almost 9 out of 10 Americans agree that privacy is a human right. So, no, privacy is not just for people who have something to hide. Privacy is for everyone. So, okay, now as a user, you know, but what has this to do with you as a developer? So let me just ask you like a few questions. Are you using the Facebook SDK in your apps? Are you using Google Analytics in your personal website? Is your app tracking what the user does? Do you even know how those SDKs communicate with third companies? I mean, let me remind you that the Facebook SDK had hidden code running, even you weren't using the SDK. And I'm sure that you probably answer some of those questions in like an affirmative way. So you're probably doing some of that. And here's where you can help. And trust me, I know this is not easy, especially as a developer working for a big company, but we need to do something about this. First of all, is we need to advocate to eradicate privacy washing. Privacy washing is all these practices by companies which make the users accept a false level of privacy. So instead of being straightforward with how we are using your data, what we're going to do is we're going to hide that. So our users will think that they're being protected or that the data is used in a different way. Maybe you're working on adding GPR or location permissions to your app so you can serve targeted ads. Don't hide that behind a message that says keep relevant ads. Like privacy washing of product gives the user false impressions of privacy. So rather than saying that I'm actually taking your location or your personal data and sending that to a third party, we just hide that behind a dark pattern. And speaking of privacy washing, incognito mode was never private. And in fact, there is a 5 billion, and that's with a B, $5 billion lawsuit about Google tracking behavior. So that's privacy washing. The second thing that you can do is to think about the data that you actually need and ask the right questions. So if you are collecting personal data, how should I protect this is actually your third question. Should I collect this is only the second question. The first question is, what will the worst people do if they got hold of this? So, for example, Zoom was using the Facebook SDK to implement the login with Facebook functionality and found that the SDK was collecting device information that wasn't necessary. Likewise, other apps like Tinder, Grindr, and Pregnancy Plus had also been quietly sending sensitive user data to Facebook. That data included religious affiliation, dating profiles, and healthcare data. And that wasn't them purposely sending that information, but rather the Facebook SDK collecting it. So let's ask that first question. What will the worst people do if they got hold of this information? Well, in Egypt, they're using dating apps like Grindr to find and arrest LGBT people. And this article, like you can see, is from like a couple of months, but this is something that has been going since 2017, if no more. Remember the example of adding location permissions for every ads experience? According to the Times, at least 75 companies receive anonymous, precise location data from apps whose users enable location services to get local news, weather, or other information. So you just downloaded an app because you want to check the weather, and all of a sudden, all these companies are receiving information that have nothing to do with weather. And we're causing this. We are integrating those SDK. We are creating those SDKs. Like we might not be aware of the consequences, but they are very real. So that's privacy. Let's now talk about our community. And here I want to focus on empathy and integration. Roman Lizarov wrote not long ago that the most important quality a software developer should have is being a good, caring, respectful person. To which some people reply, I mean, Torvalds must be an exception. And this made me think, because when I think about Linus, I also think about the likes of Gordon Ramsay. And whether we like it or not, there are a lot of people who feed from these figures. So they actually think that being an asshole is a nice way to treat each other so they can learn and improve. Tough call, we can call it, I guess. So you motivate them by yelling at them, rejecting their opinions, and ridiculizing them on a daily basis. And maybe you can motivate some people doing that, probably a white male, by the way, but you are losing everyone else there. Empathy is very, very important, not just as a member of our community, but as a human being. Also, the fact that you're technically good doesn't mean that you have to be an asshole. And if you're one of those that likes to imitate Linus, etc., being an asshole doesn't make you him, and definitely it doesn't make you any smarter. But we're not there yet. There's a whole lot of people that still thinks empathy is not important, and instead they will like avionics software to be written by harsh, selfish jerks, but highly skilled and responsible developers, which is an amazing sentence by itself because it goes back to the 10x engineer or the rockstar developer and basically what we all know as programming. Being a selfish jerk, harsh, and good developer might work in the short term, like when a team doesn't exist, and it's just that person working by himself, and it's definitely a him. So at some point, that team is going to need to grow, and there are most likely like two scenarios here. Like you either hire more 10x engineers, which will eventually work in silos because they won't communicating with each other. And remember, like they're good developers, but selfish here, so they want to be the rock stars. Why will they have to communicate with other developer? And this creates this kind of like race towards moving fast and breaking things. And at the end, well, they just have to microdose magic mushrooms. So be it. And that's already a culture that only accepts the same type of person. The other option, I guess, is you can hire junior engineers to solve the most trivial problem. So our rock star can be bothered with. And then our 10x selfish jerk engineer can worry only about the problems that will make him a hero because he is a rock star. But because of that, if there is a deadline, he's also the one that needs to see through it. So again, we're back to microdose magic mushrooms so they can handle all that pressure and creating again a culture that will see all those juniors engineers eventually leave. But our 10x engineer could also leave because all this pressure might end up having a price. And if your company has a buzz factor of one being that 10x engineer, then you are screwed. The buzz factor, in case if you don't know, it's basically how many developers have to be hit by a buzz. So there is nobody left that understand how the code works anymore. And this is largely the culture that we have in software development. Like we're shifting away from it, but at a very slowly pace. And this hurts. And especially hurts people that are getting into tech, and especially coming from minority groups. For example, like whenever we write a job offer, we all have unconscious biases that influence how that job offer is going to look like. If you are a 10x engineer, you might say things like include your GitHub account. But what if I don't have time to do that? What if you're a mother that doesn't have the time to work on a pet project while you're at home? What if you are a single mother? What if you actually don't want to spend your free time coding? What if you don't actually have the means to do that because you cannot afford a computer or an internet connection at home? You have an actual degree in computer science? Maybe you're looking for someone that has a degree from a top engineering school. What if you changed careers when you were 35? What if you just didn't happen to be born in the right country for this? Another typical one is must speak good English. What if you are not confident with how you speak English because, I don't know, your accent is very thick? Can we change that to good communication skills, which actually makes more sense? Recent college grad, that's another one. Why not change it to entry level and then include everyone that is just starting in tech? This, by the way, this is a way of gatekeeping. We keep you from getting into tech because you don't match a set of completely made up rules and superficial constraints that, by the way, we just happen to have out of the box. Another example here is the impostor syndrome. I'm sure you've heard about this. And there are different levels here because, for starters, this is very common in our community. So it doesn't matter if you are a junior developer or senior developer. Like myself, I had that feeling whenever I started a new job and think that everyone else is just better. But then again, that feeling, at least for me, disappears fairly quickly. What is more serious to me is when it comes to underrepresented groups. Someone that just got into tech will probably have this feeling at some point. And if that person is not fully supported from the team or the community, chances are that they will leave the tech industry altogether. Because writing code is an extraordinary feeling when it works, but when it doesn't, that could be pretty demoralizing. So much to the point that the impostor syndrome could hit you. And then is when gatekeeping actually kicks in. I'm not good at this because I don't have a pet project. I don't have a degree from a top university. I haven't dedicated enough time out of work to improve. I'm not smart enough. I'm not a real programmer. I shouldn't be here. And here's probably where a lot of 10x engineers will just tell you that, I mean, yes, you're bad, just leave. And I know that because when I was in uni, I used to think that only me and people with a computer science degree should be allowed to write software. That was the culture around me back then. So much to the point that in Spain, in 2018, that was my last year of university, pretty much all of the computer science degree students around Spain, we went to the streets. We went to the streets claiming that our profession should be regulated and that people out of it should not be allowed to, among others, write software. And that's what I thought. And maybe that's maybe you still think like that. But this whole hypothesis is just wrong from the get-go. It assumes that you need to have a computer science degree to write software. That's wrong. It assumes that people without a computer science degree don't have the knowledge to write software, and that's wrong. It assumes that companies are hiring people that only know how to create, I don't know, like a basic HTML site, and that's wrong. And by the way, if that actually happens, if someone that doesn't know how to code can take your job, maybe you're not as good as you think. And this is gatekeeping. This is us saying that unless you have the privilege, and it is a privilege, of going to a university and getting a computer science degree, unless you've done that, you shouldn't be allowed to work as a developer. And I was there, and I was stupid, and I was gatekeeping, and I was definitely wrong. So if you are a white male, you might not see this. You might not understand this whole thing, but it is there. And that's why empathy is so important. Because right now, our community looks like this, and it really, really needs to start looking like this instead. Because diversity and inclusion are directly connected to corporate performance. Like gender equality benefits everyone. It stimulates economic growth and development. It has a positive impact on the health and education of our community, and it plays a part in creating strong institutions. And ultimately, we cannot simply be building apps and tools that are supposed to work for everyone if we don't allow everyone to build those apps, to build those tools. So we have talked about ethics, privacy, and our community. We have seen that software is pretty much around us on every aspect of our lives. We have seen how the code that we write has a lot of different consequences for the environment, for our privacy, for our users. And finally, we had a look at how we are doing as a community and how we really need to acknowledge our failures and create a safe and inclusive community where everyone is welcome. And I know there's a lot to digest here, but these are all real issues in our profession. Now, you might not be interested in them. Like you might think that diversity shouldn't be important, that 10x engineers are the way forward, that privacy doesn't matter. And if that's you, then I will urge you to reconsider. I will urge you to investigate by yourself, talk to people outside of your filter bubble, get other opinions. because you're going to find yourself that there is no place for you in our community. If you do care, but don't think you can change anything just because you are just a developer, what can you do? Let's clear that up right now. What do we do then? Do we sit back and wait for others to act? I mean, that hasn't worked out very well, has it? You are a developer, yes, but you are not only that. You have a voice. In fact, you actually have some power. You are the industry. You are writing the code. You can decide what you think is right and what's wrong. So instead of ignoring the consequences altogether, you should be thinking about how can you improve this, because you have a choice here. So if you're interested and you want to fix these issues and you realize that we need to change, that we need to acknowledge what we are doing wrong, and most importantly, that we need to act, welcome aboard. So what can we do about this? And there's a lot of things here. So, I mean, first of all, companies need to do better here. They need to start implementing transparent processes for staff to raise ethical and moral concerns. All of this in a supportive environment. They also need to invest in training and resources that help workers understand and anticipate the social impact of their work. They need to acknowledge the lack of diversity in the first place also, and change the language. Adjust how to screen and search for candidates, for example. So let's say that, I don't know, maybe your current employees play a large role in who gets hired by a referral program. You should know that they're more likely to refer someone similar to them. So if all your employees are from the same demographic, that's not going to increase diversity. Actually, it becomes a really difficult thing to do. And to improve all this, you need to make diversity training available. It has to be one of the top things that you should be striving forward. But we need to push those companies towards that point. We as developers, we need to start questioning their practices. If you work for a big company, the bigger picture might not look like your business, but it should definitely be. Take responsibility for the code you write. And I'm going to throw this idea here, but maybe, just maybe, we ought to have a Hippocratic oath. But not as a goodwill gesture like all our ethical manifestos, but rather as doubling down on responsible practice. Because don't forget this, no matter what happens, you wrote the code, you integrated the SDK, you created the SDK. So we also need to create a culture of inclusion and diversity where everybody's welcome, no matter their gender, race, or background. We need to ask the right questions as well. Is this new SDK necessary? Do we need to store this data? Do we need to ask for location? How does what we do impact our users? Be humble and civil to people. Share your knowledge. Don't create silos, and stop gatekeeping. If you have a pet project or a website, use tools with privacy-focused policy. For example, you might want to change Google Analytics with Fathom. And refuse to keep silent. And ultimately, if none of that works, and if you can afford it, just leave. Leave and try to work for a company that is aligned with your values. And I know that everything I'm saying here, it's difficult, and it will be difficult, and you might be alone for a while, but that will change. So you gotta be courageous for the people that cannot afford that. You also need to be courageous for the people that want to do something but don't have the courage to do it. Because maybe, just maybe, if they see you, if they have the encouragement that they are not alone, they will join you. And there is so much more than just writing code in our profession. Right? There are code reviews, tests, ethics, privacy, diversity, community, work-life balance, teamwork, and so much more. And we need to start thinking about these issues now, and we need to act, because this is not about coding anymore. Thank you.